And it's a beautiful fall Saturday afternoon, and welcome to the Carolina Contractor Show. My name is Eric Smith, and with us as usual, Donnie Blanchard from SureTop Roofing. How are you doing, Donnie?
I'm having a great day. How about you, sir?
It's a fantastic day. We'll show you what it looks like outside a little bit later because we have a great view from our studio here high atop the 7th floor of Smoke Tree Tower. Well, if you're not familiar with the Carolina Contractor, the place to start is the website. The address is, Donnie?
TheCarolinaContractor.com.
Visit TheCarolinaContractor.com. You can find details about the show, including the Facebook link, and that's what Donnie updates all the time. You can get links to past shows, download them in the podcast, listen to them at your own pace. We've got a YouTube page, and also Ask the Contractor, which I refer to as Ask the Donnie. If you have a question about your house, the inside, the outside, the roof, the bottom, the top, grilling techniques, maybe if you want to get a hot tub, how to install it, Donnie would like that question. If he can't answer it, he'll find somebody who could. And if we have time today, we would like to talk about some questions people have sent in. But we have a pretty big topic, and it's the time of year, which is, aside from Halloween, is an election coming up. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not a political show.
No.
But some of the stuff that has been put in platforms of political parties definitely will affect your house. It'll affect your job, building codes and things like that. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, a little history lesson from Donnie.
Yep. I don't know if you've ever looked into this or not, but you always see the elephant being associated with the Republican Party and the donkey with the Democrat Party. Mm-hmm. So just for folks out there listening who have never looked that up before, I'll share a story with you that Andrew Jackson, the guy on the $20 bill, he's actually a war hero back in the 1800s, and he was running for president. So the guy he was running against labeled him a jackass, and he said, well, that's fine. He just ran with it. So turns out political cartoonists were a big thing back in the 1800s because they didn't have many other sources of media to get their message out there. So being a confident guy, he just ran with it, and the donkey ended up being associated with him as a Democrat, and he actually won that election and was the first democratically elected president. Mm-hmm. And with the elephant, Abraham Lincoln, representing the Republican Party back in the 1800s, he used the elephant on his campaign material. And he got the elephant idea from an expression that soldiers used who were in battle. And they used to describe the elephant, or they used to describe battle as seeing the elephant. And when I read this, I just got chills because you can imagine, the rubber meets the road. When you're out there and someone's trying to kill you and you're on the battlefront, I can imagine it is equal to an elephant coming through the trees and you're in the presence of this mammoth.
Yeah, and something you hear coming through the trees before you see it in many cases.
Right.
You hear the marching, you hear the gunfire, and it's going to get real quick.
Right, that's exactly right.
Now, this isn't a political show, obviously. We talk about, as Donnie is a general contractor, and we talk about houses and building and stuff. But again, this election coming up, we're not picking on an individual candidate. This is just the obvious thing. We noticed on Joe Biden's page that he has a climate plan. Mm-hmm. And his climate plan is to be net zero by 2050 and carbon neutral by 2035. Real quickly, Donnie, explain net zero versus carbon neutral.
Yeah, this ties into what we've spoken about over the last, 10 or 20 shows. Mm-hmm. And it really got my attention. What we've said before is net zero basically means there's a house that produces as much electricity as it consumes. So basically you're using solar panels, geothermal heat pumps, things like that, and your family is monitoring their conservation, and at some point that electricity consumed equals the amount that you pump out. Mm-hmm. Carbon neutral is similar. Basically what they're trying to figure out is how to remove carbon emissions from the atmosphere or just eliminate carbon emissions altogether so that we don't produce more than we consume. So similar to net zero, but I would say that the carbon emission applies more to the auto industry.
Right. So again, we're not going to get into the details of whether there's some candidate you should support or not support on this, but just how it can affect you in general, especially when it comes to your house, because the other big plan is about retrofitting and changing building codes, making homes more energy efficient, which everyone here in the room and in Radio Land would agree is a good thing.
Yeah.
But the question is, should the government be mandating or forcing it? And if they are, what are the costs involved? So we're going to hit kind of the high points of this platform in Biden's campaign. Number one being it's upgrading 4 million existing buildings and weatherizing 2 million homes. So you looked at a little bit more of what that might require.
Yeah, and the big thing with net zero is it's really hard to accomplish as a retrofit. So with net zero, you almost have to start from scratch and do this with a new construction build. And I just feel like that's really tough to do. When you said about weatherizing so many homes and bringing buildings up to this net zero code, that's the only way to successfully accomplish that. You can't just do new construction. You have to account for what's out there now. And I just don't know that it is totally realistic. And one thing that I did is I thought back to 1990. And even though I wasn't in the construction field other than working for my father, we've come a long way. When you consider a house that was built in 1990, windows are double pane now with argon gas between the panes, and they have a low E coating on it, and that's just become code minimum in just a short time. So I could totally see technology advancing to the point where we may have windows that are an R value of 10 or 15, and that's just customary down the road. But there are things that make sense, and when you're betting on technology, I think that that's a safe bet for some of that stuff. But for all this stuff to come together collectively and in that short of a time span, I just don't see it happening.
And as you said, for retrofitting, it's not nearly as effective. So another part of that platform is building 1.5 million energy efficient homes. So that's talking about starting from the ground up, which we've talked about this in the past. If you're going to make an energy efficient home, the best time to do it is when you break ground to put in that foundation and go up the way that way.
Well, more so than that, I think about some of the things that we have going on in the construction industry right now. I mean, labor shortage is a real thing. We did a whole show around why we think that it's really hard to find good help. And another thing, material prices are sky high right now. Total side note is I have a connection at a truss company. Of course, they buy lumber on a whole nother scale than the average consumer, but this guy told me that they are expecting lumber prices to come down drastically by the end of this year. And as a matter of fact, 2x, like 2x4s, 2x6s, have already started to come down. Plywood is just holding strong, and plywood's about 5 times more than it was last year.
Well, good, because I want to build a deck, and I delayed it. When COVID first hit, I thought, what a great time. I'm home all the time. Let's redo the deck. And then I went to the lumber store and went, what in the wide world of sports? The prices on 2x4s and stuff had really, and the supply was very limited.
Yeah, I agree. And, another thing that comes to mind with this being realistic or not is people just don't have an understanding of how important a lot of this stuff is. And, you've got builders out there and they want to build the house as cheap as possible so they can sell it as cheap as possible. And unfortunately, that's the majority of business models out there, until it becomes a code requirement, like we mentioned a few shows prior, that the energy code is about twice as strict as it was just 10 years ago. So unless some of this stuff becomes a mandate, I just don't see everybody getting on board to make it happen.
Well, the time frame of this was 4 years. Now, you just mentioned something that we really didn't plan to talk about, but I think it's really important. You know how the chain of command works on building a house. It's not, you might be a GC, but there's other specialists that come in. They're all going to have to be synced together and have the materials and the training to build these houses. That to me sounds, just by itself, would take 10 years just to get the chain lined up correctly to start building like this.
Now, I'm all for forward thinking, and if you can get all your subcontractors on that same page and everyone to work in sync with one another, I know how hard it is just to find qualified labor right now. And, it takes someone like myself where I've been building for 15, 20 years, and I have established this subcontractor base they're just phenomenal. But my sub base did not look like this 15 years ago. So it's taken a lot longer to put people in place that I can depend on. And then, you got to make sure those people are paid on time. You got to make sure that they do their proper continuing education, and just a lot of pieces and parts here that are already suffering. One thing I hear when I talk to my subcontractors is, man, we can't find any help. And, I kind of keep quiet on that front. I've had the same crews for about 12 to 15 years, and I'm just very blessed in that area. But there are a lot of people who just can't keep qualified folks, and so I think that's gonna be a big contributor.
This is the Carolina Contractor Show, and we're talking about, again, not politically speaking, just the fact that Joe Biden's campaign has talked about in their effort to address climate change on making more homes that are net zero and carbon neutral. And the basic plan is the country on a whole would be net zero by 2050, carbon neutral by 2035. So let's talk about the cost of this, the basic numbers. And we know with government, they always run under their budget and they're on time. Right now, it's $2 trillion over 4 years to meet this goal. That's about $6,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States, aside from every other thing that the government's spending money on. you just kind of, your gut and your experience says that's not going to happen. You just can't get this up and rolling that quickly.
Right.
So that's going to mean longer time, and it's going to incur more cost.
Right.
What is any way you could see it possibly getting done in such a short amount of time?
Well, the one thing that got my attention when I did my homework on this is that they originally had a plan to spend $1.7 trillion over 10 years. So they condensed the years and increased the money. And I always preach about payback. If you do these things, what's the payback period on doing X, Y, and Z to my house? And everything that we preach about has a pretty quick payback. When you mentioned just how much this is going to cost taxpayers eventually, I'm guessing that they have a plan to put all this stuff in place, or just to get the wheels in motion with the $2 trillion in the first 4 years. And then they're saying it's going to take 30 years to successfully implement. But I'm kind of torn on this one, because I know that a big change can't happen in 4 years. I'm wondering where you pump $2 trillion to get everybody on the same page in that time span. And that said, I always preach about it's never going to be cheaper to build than it is today. So I built my house 10 years ago. My house would cost another $100,000 if I were to build it today. So
I know where some of that $2 trillion is going to go, a lot of it.
Where?
It's going to go to signs throughout the country saying we're getting ready to build net zero houses right here.
Right.
They're going to spend a lot of money advertising it, but
Yeah.
before the shovels hit the ground, I'm with you. I think
Yeah.
realistically, you can pump $10 trillion into it.
Right.
You need time to develop this plan out
Yeah.
to get it into action. I don't think it would be that quick.
So if I were going to side with anything to do with this plan, I would say that there's a miniature city. So it's not a subdivision. There, I think, around 30,000 people projected to eventually live there. And there's this German engineer. This guy is a genius. And I'll put this up on the website, by the way. I saw where he has these neighborhoods planned out, and everybody is going to work off of geothermal power. So similar to a geothermal heat pump with your HVAC system, he has subdivisions sectioned out so that so many houses can live off of this geothermal power source. So instead of selling them gas or electricity, he's selling geothermal power, and basically all these houses are set up to be net zero, and they only consume exactly what he produces. And he has a really good recipe, and I know that that's doable, but to implement that nationwide, I still think it's far-fetched.
It's the geography.
Exactly.
If you've got so much land in the mountains and the prairie, and then you've got coastal land, you can't use the same. There's no one fix for all the houses that can do this. Now, there's some other stuff. We've talked about this in the past, Donnie, of things you can do as an individual of your own house that you can help increase the efficiency of your home. What would the cost, if we can kind of scale this down to the individual house, some of the price points that would happen to an individual house to, I guess in this case, retrofit?
Right. You can retrofit some houses, especially if they were built, say, in the last 10 or 15 years. Going back to a house from the 80s or the 90s, I don't know how that would really work out, and you may spend more money doing the retrofit than you would just building a new house. What I'm seeing right now, for a net zero house, depending on the area you live in, anywhere from $200 to $400 per square foot. And yeah, that's a scary number, but that $200 a square foot, if I were to build a net zero house just here in our area, I would say that we could get somewhere around that $200 a square foot mark, and that's with a conditioned crawl space, that's with solar panels. And of course, when you factor in the tax credits from solar panels, that number comes down a little bit. But I think that a lot of people really, really go overboard, and there are a lot of builders who, not many around here, but there are builders who specialize in this. And if you do everything you can possibly do, you're all over that $300 to $400 a square foot mark.
Yeah, and if you're not having to pay a high electric bill or a gas bill or something, it makes sense. But it goes back to what you said.
Right.
Building new houses to be efficient is much easier than retrofitting.
Right.
Would you say that investing that much money in that many homes, 4 million homes, do you think that that's really just a waste? Should you just say, hey, this is going to take a generation to change, but the old houses stay how they are, and let's just focus 100% on new builds?
Well, weatherization of the old houses, I think, is important, but there's only so far you can take that. So I do feel like they should focus on the older houses as well as the new houses. Most of the houses built in the last 10 years are pretty darn efficient. The only thing I could think of is maybe add insulation overhead in the attic, and a lot of the things we preach about on the show. Crummy windows were a thing, up until about 10 years ago, and changing your windows out. But we mentioned on the window topic that a window only has an R value of about 3, and that's pretty darn good. But when you're building this wall cavity or your envelope of your house as an R25 to an R30, it's obvious where all the heat transfer takes place. When you get the window and that's an R3, that's where you're losing or gaining your heat there. But yes, I do feel like all in all, putting the money towards this is something that needs to happen. I do feel like it's going to create jobs somewhere. I just think that probably, a
lot of government jobs.
Yeah, my builders are going to kill me for saying this, but I do feel like just implementation through the inspections and going that route and just making people build to a certain standard, a uniform standard, is about the only way to achieve this nationally. So,
right, I agree with that, but that's my whole point. That in itself is going to take a decade or two to get that running. So I think the idea of building energy efficient homes,
right,
fantastic. I'm for it. But it's pie in the sky to say, give us trillions of dollars and in 4 years we're going to do this. In 4 years, you won't even have the trucks ready to deliver the supplies, let alone, as you said, inspections and codes. And we have past episodes up on the website, thecarolinacontractor.com. We just talked about Hammurabi, if we go back thousands of years, and his building codes. It's going to take a while to do this. All right, we usually take a break right here, but I don't want to stop because this is very interesting. So let's talk about the new homeowner or the new home build. Someone is building a home. What are some of the steps they would have to take? Keep the government out of it. They just say, I want to build the most energy efficient house I can. What are some of the steps they need to take? We've got the lot, all right?
Yep.
What's the first step?
Well, I outlined about 10 steps when I was making my notes for the show, but and these are just recommendations, but not limited to. This is more along the 200 square foot build. Orientation is a big thing. They recommend that your ridge line on your roof should run east to west, and this guarantees that you'll have a direct south-facing slope, and that's for the solar, and we'll get to that in a moment. But simple design is something that they really encourage, and being an architecture major, simple design, I'm all for it. When you ride by a house in a subdivision that's a $500,000 house and it's cut up, it's beautiful, but there are a lot of leak-prone areas. There are a lot of wasted space, and just that simple design, it basically limits your exterior surface area, and exterior surface area is the enemy for energy efficiency. So, boxy with a lot of open space is a good thing.
And I also see on this one of the most energy efficient things is popcorn ceilings. So those will be coming back, right?
Oh my word, no.
Okay.
They actually they make your power bill double. Don't go.
Okay, don't do popcorn ceilings.
Exactly.
Plus, you have no friends. All right, what else can we do then? All right, we've got a simple design, a box house, a shotgun shack.
Exactly. Correct window orientation is big, and this has been around since I designed my house. I have very few windows on the north-facing side of my house. The more windows on the south-facing elevation, the better. East and west are okay as well, but you want to concentrate the majority of your windows where they get the most sun exposure. Another side note here is large overhangs. I always drew everything with at least a 2-foot overhang, and the higher summer sun, which would put the most heat into your house, those big overhangs, even if you have south-facing windows, they cut the higher summer sun off from being able to radiate heat into your house.
And I understand the benefit of awnings.
Yep.
But please, if you don't have to put an awning on your house, don't put an awning on your house. Let the overhang take care of some of that sunlight.
I think a lot of the awning stuff you see out there was before everybody had central air. Whole house fan and awnings were about your only hope of making it through summer. So the correct thermal mass is a big deal. Concrete floors are a big thing in these net zero houses because they retain so much heat during the day that they let that heat back into the house. And as a matter of fact, we have a really interesting guest next week, and he has radiant heat floors. We designed his house, 10 years ago before this was all a big deal, and I'll let him elaborate on that. But concrete countertops, a lot of people have granite that kind of serves the same purpose, and they just store heat. A good example of this is, your roof is a major mass of thermal energy. So your roof absorbs sunlight all day long, and it may not be 160 when the sun goes down, but it's still warm to the touch several hours later.
Is.
So just stores that.
Ever walk up in your attic in the summer?
Exactly. Controlling airflow, and I think we just did the show Build Tight, Ventilate Right. This really touches on that. And when you build tight, ventilate right, I think you can get your house down to about 1% in terms of air leakage versus 30%, which is the average house. So that makes a really big difference. And the thing you want to make sure there is you want to get fresh filtered air into your system through your HVAC system. Balanced insulation. A lot of folks push for the same insulation overhead in the walls and down below, where now our code is R19 in the floor, R13 is the minimum in the walls, and then R38 overhead is what they require you with from the inspections department. But a lot of these net zero folks are going, R50 to 70 overhead, they're going R50 in the walls, and they just recommend that you have the same amount of insulation everywhere. Your HVAC equipment, we can't say this enough, that's a big deal. I think the push here is to go all electric with this stuff. So a heat pump or a geothermal heat pump are what they recommend. The tax credits for geothermal are not what they were 10 years ago, but they're still out there. And I guess the technology there says that it's much cheaper to move heat from one thing to another. So with the geothermal, you're moving the heat from the ground into your house and figuring out a way just to condition your air that way. But yeah, moving heat from one thing to another is much cheaper than burning a fossil fuel. So I see their point there. Domestic hot water, and I guess this is a nice way to say it. You're making your own hot water in-house. The reason it's called domestic, but solar water heaters, they've come a long, long way in the last 10 years. There is a ground source heat pump, so it actually uses the coils from your HVAC system, and the water is heated up through there and then stored in a storage tank that looks just like a water heater.
So it's just taking advantage of a heat generation that's already there.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yep. I'm going to look into that for our house, and I've got so much on my plate that seems like a big move to make, but if it's cost effective, I think I'm going to go for it. Efficient appliances and lighting. Both of these have come a long, long way in 10 years, and I just recommend when you get the appliances, you go through the energy tags and you see how much they use every year, and you'd be amazed at the difference in some of the refrigerators out there. It costs triple to power a refrigerator with all the bells and whistles.
I actually scored a couple big screen TVs in our house years ago because I showed my wife the sticker. So guys, if you're angling for a big screen TV, they'll have the little energy efficient stickers and how much energy they'll use in a year, in the average year, and it's like a couple bucks.
Right.
I mean, and then you can say, it's for the environment.
Yep.
I've got to get this 60-inch
Absolutely.
screen TV.